Hello, Ro. How are you doing? Oh, I think you are on mute still. I had to
After how
build up.
many episodes? This is
We've all done it. we I think this
yeah.
feature request for StreamYard is auto mute, auto unmute.
Yeah, as soon as you start talking, it should at least flash and say, "Hey, I think you're talking. Want to unmute?" I think
Absolutely.
Zoom tries to do that once in a while.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
so how have you been? Different
Great.
location?
Different location. We are in Switzerland. Well, I'm in Switzerland. Uh, some exciting things here. We had some customer demos and also talking about the exciting AWS Zurich region that just opened.
Yeah, that's the latest news. I don't know how many customers in Switzerland need local storage. I guess a lot, given
Well,
all the banks that are there.
we're talking to a lot of the people here, a lot of customers that really that either by law or by strong choice have this data locality regulations that they really want to keep data in the country, and more
Hmm.
regions makes that more accessible for more people. So great to see that.
I wonder why AWS went with an entire region instead of doing, they do this citywide, you know, deployments now in the US, which is kind of like an outpost, but I forget what they called it. Let me look that up. But it's kind of like an outpost, but not quite. It's like a mini city level deployment that gives you a lot more edge compute.
Hmm.
So yeah, I got to check out what that service was called, and they were starting to roll it out in the US in a number of different places.
I'll post the link to the AWS post. How about you? How have you been?
Been pretty good. It's been a crazy week and a half, 2 weeks, as we are ramping up to reInvent, and as you can imagine, lots of activity happening in preparation for it, lots of coordination. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I have received 100 invitations on my calendar for that particular week of reInvent.
Oh wow.
I've lost track, I've lost count. Uh, all the slots seem to be filled up. So it's going to be a very, very exciting week.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's gonna be really fun to just be with all the different people primarily, and then also all the learning, all the just meeting and catching up, all the face-to-face interactions. And now that COVID's mostly behind us, it's great to. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand for in-person interaction.
I agree. And I think when it comes to reInvent, just a note for anyone who hasn't been to reInvent yet, there are tens of thousands of people over there, and there seems to be a tendency to kind of rush into all these talks and events and stuff like that. But just take a step back and realize that the whole point of reInvent is to meet with the people. It's to interact with them, because the face-to-face time is something that's scarce. You really don't get it. So spend as much of your time as possible meeting with people. All the talks, all those presentations are going to be online sooner rather than later, and you can catch up on them once you're back. But the chance to meet with people, interact with them, spend time with them, that is something you're not going to be able to get back post reInvent. So make the most of it. Try and meet as many people as you possibly can. Those connections matter. And yeah, look forward to meeting some of you over there as well.
Absolutely, that's great advice. But if you are going to rush to a talk, I would suggest rushing to this one. This is PRT086 Roll. This is your Cloud Fix talk. We've been mentioning this for the last couple of episodes. We just wanted to put
Correct.
this one out there again. This is
Exactly.
pretty exciting. We got to see some people's reaction to Cloud Fix today, and it's really neat. Just the way to basically implement AWS recommended fixes in a very easy, straightforward manner.
Correct. So, but this particular talk is actually more than that. What we're doing in this talk is I'm basically trying to share my 15 years of experience working on the AWS platform, managing 45,000 odd accounts, and bringing some of our learnings, our perspectives um, on cloud cost optimization and saving. And Cloudflix is a very tiny sliver of that bigger picture. So I would love to share, what I've learned with the community. So come on over, come and talk to us. We'd love to share our experiences.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. It's the realization of learnings over, well, like it says in the description, 45,000 accounts. If you don't have some ability to understand and control your costs at that scale, you'll be bankrupt pretty quickly. So I think it's
Yes.
really neat, the experience that you get to share. I'm looking forward to it. And
Looking forward to it myself. So yeah, so if you're around, please come to this session. It is on Wednesday. Is that correct?
that is
At
correct.
5:35
I'll
p.m.
pull it back up.
There you
Wednesday,
go.
5:35 p.m.
Correct. So I promise to keep it short. It says 15 minutes, but I try to pack in as many of my experiences in that time as possible.
Excellent. And we have one more that we want to talk that we've been also mentioning. We are doing a daily live stream. I want to put that here, 7:30 a.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then a final wrap-up stream 5:30 p.m. on Thursday. So the idea is on the morning shows we'll talk about the day before. So this reInvent starts on Monday, the 28th. So then we'll start our live streams the following morning, Tuesday the 29th, Wednesday the 30th, and then December 1st, and then, 2 on December 1st.
Correct. And this should be pretty exciting. I mean, there's so much to cover. There are going to be tens of thousands of delegates over there. The show floor is going to be packed through the week. There are going to be tons of new announcements being made. This year is going to be pretty exciting because, on one hand, you have the economic slowdown, you have all the layoffs and stuff happening at large enterprises. I believe cost and efficiency is going to be a big focus area this week, or this reInvent week. So let's see what actually gets announced. I think it matters even more that folks start leveraging the cloud to do what they need to do, because it is the most efficient way to do it, as long as you know how to do it right. So hopefully AWS gets more opinionated with their recommendations. Hopefully there'll be tons of new announcements about how to be more efficient in terms of new services, new ways to do things, and so on. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing what they announce.
Absolutely. And we'll be there to cover it and to join our live streams early in the morning for our opinionated and filtered take on what happened the day before, what to expect that day, and looking forward to a lot of good content, a lot of busy days. I'm sure by the Thursday 5:30 p.m. we might have to be sipping on a coffee to keep us going. So that final show, it seems like a bit of a marathon, but we will do this. We might
do the live stream over breakfast, depending on how jet lag is impacting us, or me in particular, and how hungry we are. We're going to fuel up before a super packed day, so you never know. You might get a glimpse of what our breakfast is each day.
Awesome. Well, without further a locally appropriate phrase, adieu. Without further ado, I want to bring in, I think I pronounced that right. My French is terrible. I'm going to bring on Franck Pachot. Now, due to timing issues, we recorded this a few days ago in beautiful Lausanne, Switzerland, which is home of CERN, and it's also home of Franck. So he is a developer advocate for Yugabyte, and he is an AWS data hero. And we had a great conversation with him, and I'm going to get that started. All right. Anything else we should cover before we start that?
No, I think let's get right to it.
All right. Well, here goes, and we will see you again soon. Okay. All right. Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy Asks Anything episode number 25. I'm here in Lausanne, Switzerland with Franck Pachot, and he is AWS data hero and developer advocate at Yugabyte. So, Franck, it's really great to meet you. I've been following you on Twitter.
And nice to meet you in Lausanne.
Yeah, it's really nice to be here. Actually, this is my second time in Switzerland, and the first time I was here, I actually got engaged to my wife here. So, pretty special spot for me.
Perfect.
Well, tell us about yourself. How did you get started with AWS and tech in general?
So before all that, before cloud, before AWS, and before being developer advocate, I've been doing databases mostly always, and as a consultant mostly.
Okay.
So all databases, but a lot of Oracle, some Postgres. I had also some interest for NoSQL databases, but not so much. And then I changed completely about one year and a half ago, where I started to look at distributed SQL databases, and I was so interested by that I became developer advocate for
Okay.
one of them.
Well, we're definitely going to get into the details of Yugabyte in a bit. And what about AWS? How's your AWS journey? Where did you start with AWS?
So first, I think I've looked at different clouds. I was consulting in Switzerland, and here first Europe was a bit late going to the cloud when compared to US, and especially in Switzerland, people like to have their data in their data center. Depends on the domain, but for example, all the banks in Geneva, they don't want to put a lot of things to the cloud. So cloud started quite slowly, and also for databases, it's not the first thing that people move. So actually, I started to look at AWS also as a trainer. I was a consultant at DBI Services, a consulting company here, and we provided some training. And also, but we can talk about it later, I was also a trainer for AWS Academy, which to teach to students.
Oh, okay. So you got involved with AWS as a consultant and looking at ways to help businesses here bring their data into AWS, and then also helping them. So what was it like dealing with businesses who were kind of maybe skeptical of cloud solutions and had on-prem installations? How did you deal with that as a consultant?
The first thing is really understand what they need, what they want, but also what is the fear about the cloud. Because sometimes, for example, something that I've seen in Switzerland, enterprises just saying, oh, we cannot go to the cloud. So a few years ago, when there were not a lot of cloud providers there, we cannot go to the cloud because there is no data center in Switzerland for the major cloud providers. And that was kind of blocking. And then the cloud providers came, and those enterprises also started to go to the cloud. But then they looked at the price, and they were like, oh, Switzerland is expensive. Finally we can go to Frankfurt.
Okay.
And then you realize that the fact that there were no data center in the country, it was just the mindset that was not there yet. But then when they look at the cost, they realize that they can also put the data elsewhere.
And in Switzerland, so that there's some certain laws here where companies either need to or strongly prefer to have their data located in the country. Like I know Proton Mail, they advertise heavily that data centers are in Switzerland, that kind of thing.
Yeah, first there is this Swisscality where people like to have that, but there are also some legal reasons. For example, in banks, you cannot even work for a bank if you do not live in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
One reason is that it happened a few years ago that there are some private banks, so of course with private information about their customers. But then some people living in France, working in Geneva, were intercepted by the police in France, and then was some difficulties and about handling that. And then today they just hire only people living in Switzerland. So the data is in Switzerland, so that they are sure that nobody can do something without being under the Swiss law. Basically.
Oh, okay. Well, that's, I used to live in Australia for a couple of years, and I think they have very similar. They want data onshore. But actually, that brings us to a fun announcement. I wanted to put. I'll share this. Put this on the screen. 1 second here. So talking about data locality, let's bring this up.
Yeah, big news was yesterday, I think.
Yeah.
At the time we are recording. Big news, but we knew that it was going to happen, but now the region is there in Switzerland, in Zurich, and it's not a small region in the sense that there are 3 availability zones, so you have everything you want for high availability. There are not all services yet, but that will come. And and now that means that AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle Cloud have data centers in Switzerland. So the reason of not having data in Switzerland is not there anymore.
No, I saw your tweet about trying to zero in on exactly where it is, but
yeah.
So we know it's in Zurich, but
yeah, that's
color
something
beyond that.
funny because it depends on the cloud providers. For example, I've seen that Azure, you really know where are the data centers. For AWS, they try not to disclose that. Even employees at AWS do not know it. Of course, if you search about the building constructions or the big data centers, you can have some ideas. But I think it's a good idea for security, so that people, it's not so easy to know where the data center is physically.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's interesting to know where it is because, for example, for some people are doing hybrid clouds, being on 2 cloud providers, and some of them do not realize that maybe they are in the same data center. Because of course, AWS will not build 3 data centers in Zurich. They will rent in an existing data center, can be clinics, can be...
Well, I guess if you were really curious, you could probably start doing pings to known IP addresses, but doing some latency checking. But yeah, who knows? Well, you're right. I'm glad. I'm glad exactly it's wherever it is, it's nice and safe.
The ping is significant because you don't know also how many. It's just a matter of milliseconds when you are just around a city. So I don't know.
Yeah, good point. Well, yeah, I'm glad that wherever it is, it's nice and safe, and that's neat. So what was the reaction? I mean, you were at the AWS user group last night. What was the... I'm sorry, I missed that. My flight got in a bit later than I wanted it to. What was it like?
Yeah, that was nice. A lot of people came, and probably this announce was a reason. Because especially around Lausanne, there are a few big AWS customers there. Not a lot in Geneva, maybe because there are more banks, but in Lausanne there are many of them, and of course they are interested about having a data center in Switzerland for data location, but also for latency.
Awesome.
It's always faster, even if Frankfurt is not so far. It's always faster when you're in the same country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, coming from Australia, you really notice the ping times really start to change when you leave the country.
I usually use a region in Australia when I want to show the longest ping.
Hey, well, you had I was following your journey in October. You had a busy month. Tell us about your travels. That was pretty crazy.
After this COVID, where there were no conferences, then everything came in September or October. Probably there are also some conferences that usually happen in November, but they didn't know what would be possible when they planned it because of COVID. So yeah, October was quite full, and also because now I'm developer advocate. I go to different kind of conferences. So developer conferences, I've been in DevOps Morocco, DevOps Belgium. I've been in Postgres conferences also. I've also been in Oracle conferences. So yeah, the different kind of conferences means that there are a lot. But it's nice after 2 years not traveling and not meeting people. That's something we can do a lot virtually, but meeting people physically, there are no workaround.
Yeah, no, it's amazing that you can't beat that in-person, face-to-face. Getting on a whiteboard and spur of the moment ideas. And I think one day tech will have some approximation of a solution, but we're not there yet.
I don't know. Facebook tried with Meta, but they realized that it's not the same experience. And And giving a talk, I mean, I need to see the reaction of people. Doing something virtually is very difficult, especially when the platform where you do it do not have an easy chat to get interaction and question. It happens only once that I did a virtual talk, and I didn't even see the number of attendees, so I knew only about the moderator who was there, but you don't know if you're just speaking.
No,
in
it's
front
really
of
it's
your
really hard to keep that energy up when you don't know, okay, and how is the room reacting, and you can see, okay, people are starting to check their email, whatever. Yeah,
and you
it's
don't
really,
know if you have to go into the detail or just skip something. And
yeah, exactly. Well, now that you're back, we've got the AWS announcement. So tell us about what's involved in being an AWS data hero. You've been doing that since 2020, right?
yeah, it was just before COVID or during COVID. Yeah, actually, it was really a surprise for me because I applied to AWS Community Builder,
Okay.
where you apply and then depending on what you do, what you share in blog post, presentation, all that. And then I think it was just a few weeks later, they asked me if I accepted to be an hero. And for me, it was a surprise because I've done a lot in other communities. For example, in the Oracle ACE community, I did a lot in presentation, in blog, all that. So I felt like I was doing nothing around AWS, but yeah, finally it was there. I think also.
I'll pull up your hero page here.
Yeah.
Let's put that on the screen.
So as a data hero, because of course I've always been working with databases, and I think also they wanted some diversity in the technology, and for example, there are not a lot of people knowing Oracle in so different RDS services so yeah, it was a surprise. I discovered that, and really a nice surprise because it was during COVID, and then AWS heroes are invited to reInvent, but it was virtual. And then, as I've never been to reInvent before, and because it was virtual, being a hero was a nice way to meet other people.
Oh, yeah.
Where, as we said, physically it's always easier. Even if you know nobody, you have common interest, you have a beer, and you can discuss. When it is virtual, I think that without this, I would not have met so many people there.
Well, that's the one thing they haven't solved, is how to have a virtual beer. And I hope they never solve that one. That's much better in person.
So basically, data hero, I feel no obligation, no things to do. Maybe it will evolve because when there are more and more people, probably they will look at the contribution more. But I have total freedom, and just I talk about the services that are used. Of course, even being a data hero, there are some data service I try to know at least the name of all of them, but there are some services that I don't use. You don't need to know everything.
Oh, well, that would be impossible. Yeah. So my co-host and I, Raul, we try to review the top articles from AWS announcements every week, and we only pick a selection.
Yeah.
And some weeks there's 20 or 30, 40, and so yeah, I think it's hard for even one person to even know all the names of the services, let alone be an expert in all of them. So glad that we have multiple heroes in multiple different dimensions.
Yeah, that's the point, and we have also a Slack channel where it's easier to share in small group. It doesn't mean that AWS heroes know more than others, but they like to share, and then it's easier to ask them questions to people who anyway want to share. So
yeah, it's like what do you call it? A node in a network with a high degree of connectedness. Well, cool. Hey, I noticed on your profile something that really jumped out at me, something called Power Coders. Can you tell us a bit about that? That is really neat. I'll put this up on the screen here. Let's go, there we go. Yeah. Tell us about Power Coders. It looks really, really neat.
So that, for me, that was really, really interesting. So it was at the time where I started to look at AWS and pass some certifications. And I also volunteered so basically what Power Coders do, it's a non-profit organization in Switzerland, And in Switzerland, IT companies, for IT companies, it's really difficult to hire people because there are not a lot of people in Switzerland. I mean, today in IT, a lot of companies try to hire people. So that's one point. And of course, as in many countries, there are also a lot of refugees who came to Switzerland just because they were not able to stay in their country, and they went to build their life there and then professional life. And some of them started to do IT or study IT, but had to stop. And then the idea is to match both of this, so providing short training to get them into the market, but really fast. So what I like with coders, they try to be global. It's not only about a training, it's also helping people to understand the IT market, but also with the language, with the culture. So there is also some mentoring with people. The goal is really that they have all the basics in IT so that they get a first internship. And of course, there is a lot with the companies. And then with their first internship and more training, they start in the IT market.
Well, okay, so someone arrives, they don't have much of a network, they don't have an IT skill, and Switzerland needs IT skills. So this is really bringing these two things together and helping people kind of will provide for themselves, for their families, learn a new profession. Wow, that's...
And also it's pure benefit for the enterprises because they get people motivated. They really want to learn, to have a job, and also today, starting in IT is not so easy. I've seen also some people. For example, I've seen it was not directly Power Coders, but an organization working with them at some point. More with women who started in IT and had to stop because they have children and all that, and now try to come back to IT in development. So they learned procedural languages where you can just open an editor and code. And today they want to come back where you have to learn about not only languages but frameworks and React and Object.
You feel like if you're away from JavaScript for a year, it's like, oh, everything's changed.
Yeah.
And how do you jump back into that stream?
And the way you do things is different. I mean, today an hello world is not just an hello world in a file. It's a bunch of components that you have to plug together.
Well, that's really neat, taking that holistic view, right, of work is part of life, but then there's also other things that come in. And so how do you get them all together to make it more seamless, right? That's
And also Power Coder partnered with AWS because with cloud those things are easier. You don't have to learn the hardware part of the infrastructure because that would be too much, and you can start to use services. You can start to build an application using services, and the AWS Academy organization is doing that, helping students to learn, and Power Coders is part of it. So giving training with all the material and labs given for free by AWS.
So then do employers then reach out to Power Coders? I need a batch of new workers? Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, and there are some who started with an internship and then get something. I mean, it's all about motivation. When you have people who are really motivated, I see a lot of companies who say that it's really hard to hire people, but they are always looking at technologies, at keywords in the CV, at experience, and they miss a lot of people who don't maybe have not those skills, but they are motivated to learn, and that's what we do. We learn every day. I mean, my best skill is finding the right information on Google faster than others, maybe.
No, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, how my career has evolved. Right, it's being able to learn and to adapt and to change because everything's changing.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's really neat. Thank you for sharing that with me. And so how do people get involved with Power Coders, either an employer side or a mentor side?
So yeah, employers to give internships and refugees, if people know refugees who are in IT and want to go in IT, and of course teachers, but also coaches, mentoring. For example, this year, because of all those conferences in October, I do not have time to teach, but I'm available for questions. So they have a course in the morning and they have some exercises because the goal also is to get them autonomous on finding solutions. And then being available on Slack, it's still a lot remote after COVID, but maybe some people will be in Lausanne and we'll meet physically.
Well, I'll put some links in the show notes to that. That seems really neat. Well, let's shift gears a bit to something, to Yugabyte. So tell us about Yugabyte. I looked up the name. It says distributed SQL. So what is distributed SQL? How do we think about distributed SQL, and what first of all, I guess, what's the elevator pitch for Yugabyte?
Basically, there are two kind of. Before distributed SQL, there were two kinds of databases. For example, I've been working a lot in traditional databases. They run on one server, and you can have replicas for DR and for read replicas, but the reads and writes, the application connects to one server. Because it's not easy to scale out a database that has a state. It's easier with application because you can have multiple instances of the application, but when you share the data, you want one single point of truth where you have the consistent data. So that was the traditional databases, so Oracle or Postgres in open source or MySQL. But then came the need to scale out. And people think about scaling out just for the large web scale companies, but scaling out means just in the cloud, that running on multiple availability zones, because one can be down and you just want the application to continue. Even if you have small instances, you prefer 3 small instances in different availability zones than one big in one. So then came this need, but because it's difficult with all the features provided by the SQL databases, then came NoSQL, like DynamoDB, for example, where data is split and can be shared across availability zones and give this scaling out. But then people miss the SQL features. Actually, distributed SQL started with Google Spanner. Google also had its NoSQL database for their customer, but their application, Bigtable. And then you realize that everything that the database doesn't do, you have to do it in the code. You can manage transaction, you can manage consistency.
That's what we hear from people who start with Mongo, right? So first it's so easy, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm writing joins in my code.
Yeah.
Right. And so anything that doesn't live in the database,
and it's
you
easy
end
to
up writing
start,
anyway.
but then you have to make that evolve, and then you have multiple use cases, and NoSQL databases are usually good at one use case, and then you have to replicate data, and then you have to think about consistency and all that. So this is what Google has seen, and they started to build Google Spanner with the same idea of a distributed storage, but adding some SQL feature on it. And then it evolved because the technology allows it. I think it was possible before. I mean, everything that is used, the consensus protocol, all the theory behind it was already there. I think what is possible today is the cloud. You have only 1 millisecond between two availability zones in an AWS region. That was not possible before. When I started on databases, 1 millisecond was the time to access the disk.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, today we have the same between availability zones, and then it makes it possible to use those existing algorithms to distribute the database. So the idea is just that you deploy the database on multiple VMs or containers or whatever, and you can connect to any nodes, but logically you see the whole database from there.
I want to bring up the Yugabyte page on the screen. I like this cloud native, secure, scalable, resilient, and it's so is it a drop in for Postgres? Like if I have Postgres SQL statements, it all works.
So the goal is Postgres compatibility. Maybe you can show there is the key concept. That is the page that I prefer. I don't know where you click.
There we,
Because the other, of course, the home page is also always a bit marketing. This is really how it works.
Yeah,
So the part of the Postgres compatibility, the idea, today, everyone is going to Postgres or Postgres compatibility. When Yugabyte started, it was not so evident, but for example, Google Spanner had its own SQL, and then CockroachDB started to do something similar. The big difference, Google Spanner runs only on Google Cloud because they use atomic clock to solve the clock skew problem. And then Cockroach started to do something similar, but that can be deployed even if you don't have atomic clocks in your data centers. And they choose the Postgres protocol and syntax, but it's wire compatibility. And then Yugabyte came a bit later, and the idea was that seeing that we will have to add all SQL features. So rather than starting to add the features one by one, just take Postgres, which has all SQL features, take Postgres and plug that on the distributed storage. So the challenge were more to build an architecture where Postgres can be used in a distributed fashion. And then, of course, some optimization have to be done. But basically, it is plugged. There are those two layers. So in any node, you can connect to any node. And on all nodes, you will have a Postgres backend, which is the Postgres code, actually a fork of the code, because there are some changes in the code. But it is a Postgres code and a fork where new versions are merged. So that's the goal for Postgres compatibility. It's not 100% compatible because there are still a few things that need to be improved. You can do a lot of alter table on Postgres that will change the data, but that are not completely online. And with Yugabyte, you want to provide high availability. So you want everything to be online. So we have to think about how to do it in a distributed fashion so that you don't stop the application. And there are also a few things that doesn't really make sense in a distributed database. For example, in Postgres, you can use listen, notify to get some messaging between sessions. How does it make sense to do that between two nodes? So probably we will implement it for compatibility, but we need to think about the right way to do it, not to break all the scalability.
And I guess you have to achieve that balance, right? Because you don't want, as you keep that Postgres compatibility, it makes it a really easy on-ramp for people because if you know Postgres, you don't have to learn some new. So even though the underlying data model might be quite different, but you don't need to think about that. You can treat Postgres as your layer of abstraction.
Yeah. That's the main point. I mean, some application can directly be run on Yugabyte just by changing the connection string. But of course, complex application, you need also to think about the sharding and the data model. But the main point is the familiarity of it. For example, starting a new database today, you cannot start with something completely different because let's take an example. You search something, you want to do something in SQL, and you search on Stack Overflow, Yugabyte, how to, I don't know, group by in with order and all that. You will not have an answer because Yugabyte is new. If you search the same thing with Postgres, you will have a lot of answers, and those will work because you will use the same SQL layer. So the best thing is the familiarity, but then everything is also done that the behavior of the application is the same. This is also why Yugabyte implements all isolation levels, where usually scale-out databases implement only serializable, saying that it's the highest level, so it's the best. Yeah, but the default in Postgres is read committed, and then if you want to be compatible, you need to have the same behavior.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. That makes a lot of sense in terms of, okay, the way you're treating Postgres as an abstraction layer, but underneath the way that I guess there's different Yugabyte nodes that are talking to each other, and so at a certain level of detail, it's not an exact mapping, and so kind of how to iron those out, right?
Yeah.
Is what you're
Basically, the
thinking about.
distributed storage is a distributed key value data store, fully transactional, but key value. And the Postgres layer is the stateless part of Postgres. It processes the query, parsing, execution, but when it has to read or write rows, tuples, index entries, or table rows, then this is where it goes to the distributed layer, and rows can be read from multiple nodes, and this layer will also handle the transactions. Because in SQL you can do a lot of things and you need to be a seed.
So how does that compare to, like when we think about distributed in a dynamo sense, we're thinking about compute one place and storage another place. So this is a bit more tightly coupled than that.
Yeah, I would say that the distributed storage of Yugabyte, the lower layer, is quite similar to Dynamo,
Okay.
except that the transactions are cross-chart, which is not the case in Dynamo. But the idea is really that NoSQL as the basic is the basic document or key value data store, and on top of it, SQL databases have a catalog, have an optimizer that will find the best access path, have all those SQL features on top of it. So basically, DynamoDB could evolve to distributed SQL if they have a distributed transaction, which is possible, but with some challenges, and if they add an optimizer, a catalog, all that. But I'm not sure it makes sense because there are also some RDS services for that.
Well, actually, that's another question. So how do you compare that if you're looking at a brand new project and you have a chance to pick your data layer? You think, okay, on the one hand, I could do Dynamo, I could do, say, RDS, Aurora Serverless, or Yugabyte. How do you weigh the different options?
I see a lot of people really happy with Dynamo when they are really in the spirit that they want to deploy on AWS, not elsewhere, and want to be fully serverless. So you run Lambdas, you run Dynamo, and then you are really in this model where you pay only for what you use. But of course, you pay the price of that in the sense of, on top of Dynamo, you don't have the low latency that you can have with a cache, for example. Of course, you can add the accelerator on top of it, but then you are not really serverless. That's the big challenge. If you have only the storage, then you can be serverless and start a server only when you need to access to the storage. But if you want low latency for frequently used data, then you want a cache. And by definition, a cache is there to stay even when you don't use it, because you want the cache
cache
to be,
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I've seen something about that, but how does it make sense? The goal is to keep something in memory for the next call that you will do. So
Okay, so if you wanted to do a fully serverless and you weren't too concerned about latency, you could go to Dynamo. And what about okay, so then that would then lead you to more towards Yugabyte, and especially if you had Postgres expertise and Postgres knowledge, that would further reinforce that.
And then when you need SQL features, the first thing, go to something Postgres compatible today. I think this is really the even if there are still a lot of MySQL or MySQL compatible. It depends on the workload, of course. Websites, there are a lot of MySQL also in analytics because they did something. But for anything OLTP, system of record, going to Postgres is probably the right way. And then you have the choice. You can, between compatible ones, I mean, Aurora is fully Postgres compatible because they use Postgres code. Of course, there are some difference in the behavior, in the way to operate, but I see a lot of developers, they connect to Aurora, they don't even know that they are not on the real Postgres. And then you can move, and going to Yugabyte, you have also this compatibility, and then you can move from one to the other if you want to change your cloud provider or change from proprietary to open source, or or just you compare the cost. So the most important is the freedom.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
data, you cannot change your database easily. So if you have the freedom where migration is just moving data, and there are tools to move data online, but not learning something new. Yeah.
Well, cool. Thanks. Thank you for explaining that. It's really interesting the way you can think about data, and I mean, it is. I was listening to a talk about Yugabyte on YouTube and how it really is like this fundamental part of your. I mean, it's the foundation of your application, right? I mean, without data, you have. I mean, yeah. What else do you have? So thinking about
Yeah.
being able to plan for it and being able to plan out your access patterns and your usages. Oh, I noticed another part on Yugabyte side. It talked about cloud native. And so let's expand on the cloud native point, because we hear a lot about lift and shift and that sort of thing. Actually, I've got some slides for an upcoming presentation where we talk about lift and shift, and I've got a picture of a Tesla with a generator on the back. And sometimes that's what I think about lift and shift, right? Where you almost get the worst of both worlds in the sense that, okay, you're bringing all your problems with you, and then you have new ones.
Yeah.
So tell us how cloud native kind of contrasts that.
Yeah, that's something. First, cloud native can be used for many things. People think that if you put anything on Kubernetes, you will be cloud native. People think that if you use any AWS service, you will be cloud native. For me, in the context of Yugabyte, the best way I show how it is cloud native technically is when I deploy on multiple containers, can be Kubernetes, can be Docker, can be anything, and where I show that you can scale if you are a workload that increase, that you can add more nodes, or that you can remove nodes, or because you have a failure, or stop a node just because you want to upgrade the OS or the software. So doing all that only with Kubernetes commands, kubectl scale a stateful set. So this is the way I say the database is cloud native. You do something at cloud level, adding more instances or removing others, and you have nothing to do on the database. The database adapts to that. So this is in that way where I say it's cloud native. But of course, it's also built the replication in Yugabyte, for example, to protect for high availability and also DR. The replication uses WAFT groups. Basically, the data is sharded to multiple tablets, and they are replicated with WAFT, which...
WAFT is the consensus formation.
Yeah, the consensus algorithm, where you have a leader and followers, and if a leader is down, then the followers can elect the new leader. That is fully consistent, so that's the idea. And then you need, the most common configuration is replication factor 3. So you need 3 zones, 3 availability zones, for example, or 3 data centers for that. Not 2, because you need a quorum. You want to be sure that if the network is split, one side can know that they don't have the quorum and stop, and the other side can continue, so that you don't want a split brain. So you need a quorum, and this is easy in the cloud because mostly all regions in the AWS have 3 availability zones. So being cloud native is using those availability zones. If you just take Postgres and deploy it in a region, and have a primary in an availability zone and 2 standby in other availability zones, you are not really cloud native, because you use some availability zones where you are doing nothing, just applying the wall and maybe some reporting. So the idea is to use the cloud infrastructure.
So you're really leveraging, the fact that you have access to multiple availability zones. You can use Kubernetes as this. Well, just as you use Postgres as an abstraction layer on a query language, you can use Kubernetes as an abstraction layer over a cloud. And think, okay, you've got different availability zones. You can spin up different nodes. You can deploy this on, and Yugabyte works not just on AWS, but you can use it on any or most Kubernetes providers.
Yeah, or anywhere on VMs also, and it can be hybrid cloud. You can also have some nodes in one cloud provider, and there are some people doing that to the freedom to change from one cloud provider to the other. You just add new nodes, and then when it is rebalanced, you remove the other one, and the application was not stopped. And and the problem with lift and shift, if you take, we have also a lot of people coming from Oracle just because they want to go open source, they want to stop paying expensive license, but you need to think about the cloud, and you need also to think about the elasticity, the gain you have. Big difference with Oracle database on premise. You have to provision your infrastructure for the highest peak of activity that you have during the year. And then you pay for idle CPUs the whole year. You pay for the hardware, but for the licenses also. When you go to the cloud, you need to think about this elasticity and the ability where you can run with something low and then detect that the load will increase and that new node and think about it. And probably, if you take a big monolithic application and move that to a distributed database, you will not really have the benefit of it, and you will have the penalty because you have some additional latency.
Yeah.
If you build new microservices on it, then you will benefit on it.
We're in an interesting period of transition, like what you said with lift and shift. You can, as we said in the beginning, right? You have additional problems of being on the cloud, but all the old problems you lifted and shifted with you. So really rethinking your architecture to be cloud native. That's really exciting. And you brought up an interesting point. And also, I was thinking about when I used to live in Australia, we loved to see the Sydney Hobart race, and I was thinking about, you see Larry Ellison's big racing yacht. I think, okay, that's, well, it makes sense. Oracle licenses are so high, right? That money had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, but people need to think about the value they get from it. I know I've been doing consulting and a lot with customers using Oracle, but I've seen people paying a lot, but I've also seen people getting a lot of value from it.
Oh yeah.
Because they have their application. There are still in many banks, but I think in all industry, applications written in COBOL running on Oracle, and they just upgraded and it still works. And they know that data is protected, and they know that they will not have to change the code when the new version is there, so they have a value from it. If you look only at the cost, then of course it's expensive, but you have a value. I think today it's more about freedom. People can accept the cost of Oracle because it has a lot of features and it provides a lot. What they do not accept is this locking where, for example, some people were in standard edition in rack. So having a cluster not distributed because you need to be close in the same rack or data center, but having some kind of high availability in standard edition where the licenses are still expensive, but you pay not per core, but you pay per processor. And then Oracle decided, I think it was in 19C, that this option, rack, was not available anymore with standard edition. And it was not even a major release, it was just a release update. So this is where people feel they don't have the freedom of changing, they just felt they have to pay without thinking, and that's why people are looking to open source. And they prefer to have maybe less features, but more control on it.
So, you brought up an interesting point with the freedom, and I wanted to ask another question. We see a very contentious topic of the idea of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud. And I can see the pros and cons to it. Like on the one hand, you get that freedom of being able to switch providers, but on the other hand, you're kind of at this lowest common denominator where you can't build towards a particular feature set because you have to think, if I switched, is it going to be available in this other cloud? But what do you see in industry or just in general, what are your thoughts on multi-cloud? How do you weigh that trade-off?
I think it's really good to be able to do multi-cloud because of the freedom. And then, for example, with Yugabyte, you can do that because you just deploy the database on multiple nodes and you don't really care which cloud provider it is. But you need also to think about the cost of it. And a distributed database sends a lot of data between the nodes, and then you have to pay the interconnect on both sides. So you have to.
And every cloud provider has figured out that egress is.
Yeah.
that is an expensive toll booth to run your data through.
Yeah, so you have to think about all that. But other way to move for the freedom, if you run during 1 month on 2 cloud providers, so that you slowly move and see how it works, then that's a value. We have also a big customer in retail in US. They run on Google and Azure. Of course, they are in retail, and then they don't want to give money to Amazon because they compete on the business. And they choose to be multi-cloud. I think the first reason they have is that they want to be sure that on Black Friday, they can scale enough, and they are not sure that one cloud provider can provide all the instances they want. But that's a special case. I mean,
I guess that's a good problem to have. You have so much business coming through that is one cloud going to be able to handle
but you see the additional complexity, the additional cost as a reason. If you don't have a reason, do not deploy on multiple clouds just because you can.
Yeah, I think it's almost like Kubernetes, right? Like, I always tell people, if you're thinking about Kubernetes, just wait until you're absolutely sure that this is the route you're going to need to go to, because it's awesome, but there's more complexity than you'd think.
I will never recommend deploying the database on Kubernetes if you don't already have the application on Kubernetes for a long time. I mean, it makes sense to deploy the database on Kubernetes when you already have everything on Kubernetes, and then you are waiting to be able to do the same with the database. But yeah, you need to understand it solves many problems, but also brings others.
Awesome. Hey, well, anything else that we should talk about in regards to Yugabyte? I think that was really interesting, all the different, your explanations of how it works, about the Postgres, the level of abstraction, about the cloud native features. Anything else we should say on that topic?
The best, it's open source, and then people can try it, and we have a community Slack channel, and I mean, I'm developer advocate. My job is to talk about it, to get people know it, and trying it, but my goal is also to get the feedback. If something works or doesn't work, just open a Git issue or reach to us. I also discuss a lot with the engineering, with the product manager. We have a lot of things to improve or add, and it's all a question of priority, because you cannot build a database in a few months. So the priority also comes from that. And being open source, of course, the company provides support for big production, and this is what gives money to the company. But we also encourage people using it open source, because we go to Postgres compatibility, and the best way to be sure that we are Postgres compatible is to have people just taking their application written for Postgres and trying it on Yugabyte, and then it goes, oh, this specific DDL doesn't work, and then we know it, and we know what we have to improve. So,
well, I'll post the links to your, I guess, your GitHub repository, Slack channel. I'll have all that in the show notes. That will be really fun. I wanted to shift gears one more time. We've got reInvent coming up.
Yes.
What are you looking forward to about reInvent?
I don't know, because it will be the first time I go to reInvent physically. And I'm not very enthusiastic about Las Vegas, but yeah, I expect, especially meeting people. I mean, sessions, I know that there are a lot of sessions where I want to go. I was probably too late to book to have a seat there, because I didn't realize you can bookmark it to remember it, or book, and it was different. But anyway, I know that in those kind of conference, you start to look at a session and say, oh, I will go there, and then you arrive, you meet someone, you want to discuss, and for me the priority is discussing with people. The session, you can catch the information later. The people you meet, the discussion you have, that's the priority.
The advice I've heard is wear comfortable shoes, because it's spread out. It's not. So in order to, if you're going from one session to another, it could be, one building to another, and it's incredible how big it is.
And that's funny, because I'm saying I don't really like Las Vegas, but I was in Las Vegas, I think it was 3 weeks ago for the Oracle Open World. That was before in San Francisco, and now they do it in Las Vegas. I can understand the reason. There are a lot of hotels and there are a lot of places, but you have to walk a lot, work always inside. What I would prefer is working outside.
Yeah,
Fresh air.
my wife is in academia, and she told me of this ski conference she went to once, where they share these papers, and then go skiing for half the day, and then come in. That would be pretty neat, but that would be hard to pull off at a reInvent scale.
Yeah, sure. That's something I was thinking about in Switzerland, but the problem is the price. I mean, I would love to have a meetup or a small conference in Montana, but it would be probably expensive.
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. We really appreciate it. And you can check out Power Coders, check out Yugabyte, and follow Franck Pachot on Twitter. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. Twitter and maybe Mastodon. I see
Mastodon.
A lot of people are going to Mastodon. I don't know what will happen, but
that's true. I think I've set up a Mastodon account as well. So yeah, I'll put the links to. If you have a Mastodon account, send me the link. We'll put it in the show description.
Yeah, but for the moment, I'm mostly on Twitter.
Yeah, it's lots of changes going around. So I guess let's be agile. Thanks again.
Very nice. Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.